nothing you've ever done can prepare you for that. As a dad or as a parent, you fix things.
Yeah.
That's what we do.
Yeah.
Right? We fix problems. We control environments. And now there's something, I can't fix it. I can't control the environment. And now I'm lost. So what does that say about me? Now, had I had 10 years to study before that happened, I might have been better prepared.
Welcome back to Into Action, brought to you by Touchstone Recovery Center. This year, we've changed up the format a little bit, and I think it's been brought to my attention that last year we interviewed a lot of staff and alumni and people that are in recovery themselves. I thought it was great that people that were guests took us through their recovery story and what got them into recovery and how they're staying sober today. I think it's really valuable though for our listeners and for people to know the different viewpoints and how addiction can affect. It affects everyone around us. I know when I was growing up and I was struggling, my parents tried to do everything they could to help me, but they didn't know what to do. And looking back and it's like seeing the way that, at least in my story, the way that I disregarded their help and tried to do it on my own and had to fall flat on my face before I was willing to engage. It's a powerful story, and knowing my parents' side of that now, and like I told you earlier, I had my mom give her testimony, and it made me cry. It was something to behold, and I think it's really valuable for people to have that viewpoint. So, and that's one of the reasons, not the only reason, but one of the reasons that I invited today Jim Horton from the Zach Horton Foundation, who's doing great things in our community, bringing awareness, battling the stigma of addiction. And I'm really excited to have you on and to hear more about what the Zach Horton Foundation's doing. How are you, Jim?
Sure. Oh, I'm doing good. And Nolan, let me just touch on really briefly the thing that I heard when you were doing your introduction was I thought about addiction as a family disease.
Yep.
And that's something that in the early meetings that I went to when Zach was in treatment, I heard that a lot. It's a disease that affects the family. Well, you hear it, but once you live it, then you understand. Just in the same way that I can't begin to understand young people that are struggling with substance use disorder and they're in their full addiction mode.
Sure.
That I can't understand why they would make the decisions they would make. Why would you do that? Now, anyone else who has walked that path, they go, oh, I know why. It makes sense to me. The same thing as a family member now that's lived with it, it's difficult for people struggling with addiction or for families who haven't experienced it to even understand or contemplate how we can make the decisions that we make as families, how we couldn't see whatever was happening that was going on. And then once we did see it, how we could run and hide from it, right? And so for my wife and I, one of the hallmarks and one of the beginnings of our foundation was in realizing that we believe that it was the stigma of addiction, that shame that accompanies it so strong, really that caused us to want to make that our mission. It's about saving lives by ending that stigma.
Yeah, I can relate to that. I know my family, they felt a lot of that shame and guilt. It's still to this day. My mom will say, "What did I do wrong? Why did you do that when you were younger? What did I do wrong?
What could I have done different?"
Yep. And I'm a dad now, and I could see myself saying the same thing, even though I've walked that path. So I think the guilt and the stigma surrounding addiction and the self-blame that families do, it holds them back from being able to address the issue.
Sure.
And then you had also mentioned that, we run and hide as a parent. We'll run and hide, and I went through that as well with my parents, where they would pretend it wasn't happening because
Right.
it was too big of an issue to deal with. It's a pretty serious issue when your kid is taking 30, 40 pills a day and
Right.
on the verge of death. It's a serious issue. So to combat that, like, you have to go pedal to the metal and do everything you can, and it's scary. I know for my dad, he wouldn't do it. He just
and that's just it. You don't know where to go
What to do.
or what to do. Nothing you've ever done can prepare you for that. As a dad or as a parent, you fix things.
yeah
That's what we do.
yeah
Right? We fix problems. We control environments. And now there's something, I can't fix it. I can't control the environment. And now I'm lost. So what does that say about me? Now, had I had 10 years to study before that happened, I might have been better prepared.
sure
And a lot of what we do, Nolan, in our foundation and our discussions that we have with schools and with community groups is about helping prepare them. It's about starting a conversation that no one's having. So just starting that conversation is something that I believe is a step in the right direction for families that don't even know that they're going to have a problem later. And we were talking about this earlier. National statistics tell us that 1 out of every 10 people suffer from substance use disorder. And you correctly mentioned those are the ones that are reported.
yeah
Yes. So 1 out of every 10. So if you've got a 5th grade class of 30 students, 3 of those young people will suffer from substance use disorder. Yet the parents aren't going to get any information or do any study about it
sure
or anything until it's already a crisis. And you and I both know from working in the recovery community, once it's a crisis already, now I'm not thinking correctly.
yeah there's not a lot we can do unless the person wants to engage themselves.
And when you're working with younger people, how many 16, 17-year-olds they don't see that yet. And so it's just such it's a real challenge about how to educate families and get them to want to be involved. So one of the things that we do is help people. Let's start the conversation.
When you say start the conversation, do you mean so before the issue happens? You mean have parents talk to their kids about drug addiction and about the effects of fentanyl and other drugs? And is that what you mean?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Before, and maybe not just with your kids, but maybe start just with your current family members, with your brothers and sisters, with your neighbors. Nolan, at Zach's celebration of life, I want to say there were over 400 people that showed up, and without exception, everyone that I greeted in the line, that shook my hand, that spoke to me that day, they had a story. Jim, my uncle was an alcoholic. I know, what you're experiencing. Jim, my college roommate, had a baseball injury, and after 30 days taking painkillers, it was over. His career was done.
Yep.
He never recovered. Jim, and there's story after story after story, and the irony is, all those people whose hands I shook, that I had known for years and years and decades, had never once had we had a conversation about that before. That's what I'm talking about changing the conversation, is just
Sure.
getting it to start. That's how we can reduce the stigma. That's how had we known that, who knows how the outcome might have been different had we been having those conversations.
And it is a scary conversation to have with kids, especially 15, 16-year-olds. I have loved ones that, I work in treatment. I own and operate a bunch of sober living homes, and I'm in recovery. So sometimes I feel like I need to keep that a secret until the person is old enough, because I don't want to tick off mom and dad by bringing up this serious subject,
Right.
you know, and starting that conversation too young. But I think, I mean, 15, 16 is the right age. That's when that stuff gets introduced for the most part. It's not too young, I don't think.
Nolan, our national statistics tell us that 48.1% of all high school students will have tried an illegal drug before they graduate.
Mm-hmm.
That's half.
Yep.
48.1%. That first drug use usually happens in middle school. That's 7th and 8th grade. That's 12, 13 years old. The first vaping experience happens in elementary school. That's when it's starting to happen.
Sure.
If we wait until our young people are 15 or 16, we've waited too long, because half of those high school students that are going to try something, they're experimenting.
Yeah. Which
is normal.
these days it's deadly.
But it's deadly now.
Mm-hmm.
See, that's the difference. Is that now we know with the fentanyl crisis that our illegal drug supply is so laced with fentanyl that the potential that they're going to get something with that. I believe that 75% of all overdoses have a trace or have a fentanyl component to them.
Sure.
Now, some of those overdoses may be people that are seeking fentanyl or heroin that it's been covered, but many of them aren't. Many of them are taking a Xanax for the first time, or a Percocet, or an Oxy, or you know.
There's reports of people that have overdosed on marijuana with fentanyl, and it's
dying from smoking weed.
It's
oh my
scary.
gosh.
So here at Touchstone, we have 6 to 10 admissions a week, and it's very common. Like pretty much every week, we'll have a new admission that has fentanyl in their system that did not know they were using fentanyl.
Yeah.
It happens all the time.
Yeah, and that's so. Back to your comment about when should we start telling our kids. So some of when I have a chance to speak to middle school kids here in the valley, we have what's called Red Ribbon Week.
Yeah.
Here in the valley. So 1 week a year, we do drug awareness in all the schools, elementary schools, middle schools, and high schools. And when I ask the kids in an assembly full of middle school kids, what's the one thing you learned this year? Without exception, it's the same. It's a resounding, don't do drugs. Right? That's what they're learning. Don't do drugs. And I say, but yet, when we leave the school and you pull out of the parking lot, one of the first buildings you pass is a Rite Aid drugstore or a CVS pharmacy, or you go to your grocery store and there's just lines of over-the-counter drugs that are there. Mm-hmm. When you're sick at home, what do your parents do? They give you a pill. They tell you they want you to feel better, right?
Yep.
So that's what we're teaching our kids, is to feel better. Then somehow we're surprised in high school when our kids don't, all of a sudden they're not the fastest one in the class, or the tallest, or the prettiest, or the smartest, or the fill in the blank. We're surprised then that they want to feel better. So guess what they do? They turn to one of their friends, and their friend says, well, you feel like, just try this. Just try this. And so they do that. It doesn't make them bad kids, right?
Sure.
Right? They just want to do what we've trained them to do, which is to feel better. I tell this story about Zach because I think it's applicable, and it's applicable to me, and I wonder if I had applied this, what kind of different outcome I could have had. But from the time Zach was 4 or 5 years old and he started on t-ball and soccer, in the summertime, we'd have him go out in the backyard in his underwear and hold his hands out like this, and we'd spray him down with sunscreen, right? His mom's from Wisconsin, and I'm fair-skinned, and so, we would tell him stories every day in the summertime about how, well, when we were younger, we weren't very smart, and we would put baby oil on so we could get a tan. We would just fry ourselves.
Yep.
That's how we thought we were taking care of ourselves. Yeah, you get a good base sunburn on, and then you don't burn later, right? But we told him about, how we would blister and burn and how painful it was. And, by the time Zach was a teenager, I don't think he ever swam without a swim shirt on. He would take sunscreen himself, and he would spray himself down, and he never resisted it at all. And to my knowledge, my son never had a sunburn. What if at 4 or 5 years old, we had started talking about drugs? And maybe it would start when we gave him that first baby aspirin when he was sick or when he had a fever, or when we went to the doctor and something was prescribed. And what an opportunity to talk about how, you're not feeling good and you're sick. This can help make you feel better. But Zach, there may be a time when you don't feel good, and the best thing you can do instead of taking something is to talk about it with somebody.
Sure.
Well, I mean, what a different, but see, that's not even it wasn't in my repertoire. But what if we had done that from the time that Zach was 5 or 6 years old? What if Red Ribbon Week, and I ask when I talk to teachers groups, I say, what if your students were taught math 1 week a year and that was it? How much math would they know when
Yeah. Good point.
when they graduate? But yet Red Ribbon Week, we talk about drug awareness, and they all know one thing: don't do drugs. And yet we know that 50% of them are going to try it, and we know that there's a fentanyl component that can kill them in a heartbeat. And in fact, we know of several in our valley that have passed that way. Maybe we should do more than one week
Yeah.
a year, and maybe it should be an ongoing thing. So when I talk about starting a conversation or changing a conversation, and I'm not saying I'm right about it, but we've got to go deeper than just stricter punishments. Should there be punishments for drug dealers? Absolutely, right? But that's not gonna end the stigma.
Yeah. It's not going to solve the problem.
It's not gonna solve the problem.
I feel like it's a tough conversation to have for a lot of parents. I'm from the Central Valley, and I know my parents never had those talks with me. It was basically the same message: don't do drugs, don't touch that stuff, and it didn't work. So I agree with you. Something's got to change. And as far as educating young people, that's a great beginning. I mean, the Zach Horton Foundation also educates people on the use of Narcan. I know you help people get into sober living environments, and you have helped get people into treatment. How do you think that? What's the next step for Zach Horton Foundation? Are you guys gonna continue doing this and then continue the outreach? Is there anything?
So outreach is such a big part,
Yep.
right, of what we do. I mean, at Big Hat Days or Vintage Days or Clovis Fest, we have, in the community, we have our booth up. We're doing a lot of work now down in the west side, in the south end of Fresno, and wanting to have more of a presence there with again Narcan training, passing out fentanyl testing strips,
Mm-hmm.
right, helping people stay alive.
Yep.
Right. That's certainly part of it. The educational programs from, working in the schools with Fresno State and fraternities, church groups, whoever will have us,
Yeah.
come in and talk. That's what we want to help them start that conversation.
Sure.
And it's funny you say, what's your next step? I can tell you that we are exploring what it would look like. We really want to open a sober living home, because we do a lot of sober living scholarships now.
Yep.
And having the ability to be able to scholarship someone into our own home and then create an environment in there where we would teach a lot of daily living skills and how to apply for a job application.
Yep.
how to do menu prep and meal planning, right? And I don't know. I've got this idea about how a sober living home can be so much more than just a place to sleep. And I know that organizations like yours and many others in town, they do provide more of a curriculum in the sober living home. But there are many in our area where, and it's needed. It is a place, and they have guidelines about it being drug free.
Sure.
What's important, but it's also they've got other work that they need to do, and so it kind of ends there.
Yeah.
And I think that we have a unique ability, to be able to bring other learning and other teaching and other extended ideas into the home. So we'll see how that goes.
Well, I think that's a great idea, and I know there are always, so far since I've started working here in Clovis and Fresno, we need more. I mean, I think right now we have 60-something beds, and they're almost always full.
Yeah.
And it's thank goodness that we are able to. Most of the people that stay at our sober livings are in treatment, right? 95% plus. So they're coming to treatment. They're getting those services,
yes,
like the ADLs and life skills and job
right,
applications. But that's something that's really common, especially for people early in recovery, because we disregard that stuff when we're active in our addiction. We don't know how to. A lot of people don't finish high school or college, or so those life skills are very important to learn when you're trying to get back on the right track and you're trying to reintegrate, if that's the right term, to get back into society and become a productive member. A job is a pretty important step, and
and for someone who's maybe been on the streets for 5 years, or if they've been using since they were a teenager and they never developed, coping mechanisms, or just learning again what basic skills look like,
sure,
to be able to share those and have them practice them. And anyway, I just think it would be it's a wonderful opportunity. And again, your organization supplies a lot of that.
Sure.
But there are, like I say, there are a lot of homes that aren't affiliated.
Sure.
Or once outpatient is over or inpatient is done, and now it's time for them to move on someplace else, right? Because you got to make room for, well, where do they go? Then anyway, we'll see what that looks like. But anyway, I'm excited about it, and you are definitely someone I'm going to be talking to as we plan and organize and put that together to make it, as effective as possible.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I know you have no shortage of people needing a safe environment to live when they first start out in recovery.
Right.
So yeah, more, especially a good one that goes over the top with services, and that'd be great. So I'd be happy to help.
Yeah, thank you.
So I wanted to touch on, actually earlier we had talked about the 12 steps and the different modalities of treatment. Like I know there's Refuge Recovery, there's Celebrate Recovery, there's all these programs that most treatment centers tend to rely on the 12-step model, and to have most of the curriculum revolves around the 12 steps. And you were talking about some statistics earlier about national averages of success rates and how maybe we need to look at other avenues. And do you want to speak a little more about that?
Oh, well, thank you for that opportunity. So I think, I want to say it was 35 years ago, I worked in some local treatment facility. Mm-hmm. And it was a 28-day, 30-day program. We had life skills classes inside. I taught a communications class, and it was an adolescent program. And then every night we would go to the ODAC club. Right.
What's that?
The one day at a time club down.
No, you said ODAC.
Got
it. Okay.
Yeah. So we'd go to a meeting every night. And so I often joke that for the 2 years I worked there, I went to more meetings than most people, because most people, when they get out of the program, they never went back. and I was still going every night, right? So, and I found it interesting that when Zach started in treatment 5 years ago, that was kind of the same model. Not a lot had changed in that. And that doesn't mean that the 12-step program and model, in fact, I used to think there should be a 12-step program for people who aren't dealing with addiction. The value of the steps in anyone's life is so valuable.
I agree.
And so important. And I used to almost feel jealous that I didn't have a problem bad enough that could, somehow give me an invitation to be part of this club.
Sure.
Right? Over the last few years, working in the recovery movement, going to a ton of meetings, and seeing everything that's happening, and it is absolutely valuable. Make no mistake, it is absolutely valuable. And there's an opportunity perhaps to add to that.
Sure.
Perhaps 12-step programs, and this would be something that would just be an interesting conversation to have, might not be the best fit for everybody, especially if we know that national success rates with them haven't changed much in the last 50, 60, or 70 years.
Yeah.
And maybe there's some other programs that are also have a 10%, 5% success rate, 10% success rate, 20% success rate with what they're doing, that are completely have nothing to do with the 12-step program. Maybe if given the opportunity, someone in recovery can find someone who's seeking after recovery, can find a program that works
for them.
best for them. If I'm a cancer patient now, I know that, there's opportunities, to have chemotherapy, there's opportunities to have radiation, there's opportunities just to have operation and cut it out or whatever. And there's a myriad of it. And you know what, they oftentimes, because I got a friend in, they consult with the patient. And they say, here's all the things that we offer here. There's a program over here that offers something that's even different.
Yeah.
But we offer these 3 different ones. What do you think that you're going to be able to,
what fits your lifestyle and
everything?
Which,
oh my goodness, what a concept. I think we still latch onto, and you would know better than I do. I think in the recovery world we latch onto 12-step programs because, gosh, the big book has been around forever, right? And you know what? I think more than anything else, people that run recovery programs that were in recovery 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, that's how they got sober. Yeah. And so it's like that old-time religion.
Sure.
If it's good enough for mom and pa, it's good enough for me.
Yeah. And I think there has been a shift, at least with the approach. And I know here at Touchstone it's changed a lot over the last few years, where we try to meet people where they're at, and a lot of treatment centers are starting to do this, where if the 12-step model isn't right for you, if you don't want to go to meetings and you don't want to get a sponsor, and you don't want to get the steps, the question is then ask, okay, what do you want to do?
There you go.
How can we make this work? Because I feel like when a client comes in and they admit into treatment, they know what doesn't work. Like, they know what got them there. They know,
right,
like, the path that they were on is not the right path. So they're looking for change. So I agree with you. I think that forcing them into this avenue, this is the only path, that's just not accurate.
That's not accurate. And we hear over and over in so many of the TED Talks I listen to, and people that are much more learned and more of an expert in the addiction field than I am, they talk about the solution for people with substance use disorder is connection.
Yeah.
Right? Is connecting with people. So, well, why does that connection have to be a 12-step program? Right? It could be what it needs not to be is going back to the lifestyle you had before.
Sure.
Get rid of that well, in my day, the old Rolodex. Get rid of those phone numbers that are on there of your old buds.
Yep.
That's not the connection you need. But we do, if we take that connection away, we need to replace it with something. Well, for so long, it's been 12 steps. And that's not a bad connection. The recovery community here in Fresno is so wonderful. You know, the things we do with the softball tournaments, right? You know, and just the different retreats and events that we have are fantastic. But again, that doesn't work for everybody.
It doesn't. And, you know, I got sober through the 12 steps. I have a sponsor, and I think that it worked for me, but I also know a couple really good friends of mine that have a decade plus of sobriety. They don't do that. And they're like working a recovery program, but it's their own program. Some people like refuge recovery. Some people like they get really heavily involved in church, and other people that I think the key is, my point is, I think the principles and the things we learn through the 12 steps and through working those steps and going to meetings, it's connection, number one.
Yes.
Like, we get connected to a community of people that are like-minded, that want to get sober, that definitely don't want to go backwards. If you're going to a meeting, I was like the early ones, because if you go at 7:30, everyone wants to be there. It's not like they got to go to get, to stay out of jail or something.
Right.
So it's which I've done also. So, but I always like going to those meetings because I feel that connection. But I'm also optimistic that there's more and more recovery programs available to people, and maybe a little slower to get going here in the Central Valley, but they are happening.
But they are happening, and that's the key. I know I had spoke a little bit earlier, and again, just because you reference this, about last year I attended the first ever psychedelic summit.
Yeah.
Here in town. So there were some discussions about psychedelics in recovery, and again, now imagine this, because up in the Bay Area, that's very popular, and harm reduction models and everything that's happening. And it's amazing if they hadn't mentioned that, listening to how they talk about their clients and the recovery process that they go through and everything, you might not even know that it was any different if they hadn't used that specific term. Because again, it's all about connection.
Sure.
It's all about honesty, right? It's all about not so much focus on the fact maybe that of the drugs that I'm using, but once I've got my 30 days or my 14 days of detox and my 30-day inpatient, but it's about that counseling and digging deep and finding out what was it
The underlying
that I
issue.
was using in the first place for.
Sure.
What kind of childhood pain am I covering up? What kind of loneliness or mental illness that I'm facing and struggling with that I don't even know about. So I'm whatever that is, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, so I found that interesting and kind of fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, like we were talking about, there's more and more avenues to recovery, much more so than there was 35 years ago.
Yeah.
I think that most treatment centers stick to the 12-step because it's the most accessible to clients. So when they
Yes.
finish their program, they can go down the street and find 5 meetings.
Yep.
And that's not, at least in the past, that wasn't true for other recovery programs.
Right. And that's still that's a beautiful thing about it. You can be on a cruise ship and there's,
I've
you
been to-
look on a thing and here's a Friends of Bill W, right?
Yep.
There it is. So I
That's
know
right.
that I've got some like-minded people that I can go and I can connect with.
So the reading that I've done, like aforementioned, Refuge Recovery, Celebrate Recovery, Smart Recovery, there's the 12 steps, NA, AA, CA, HA, all that stuff. I think there are some similarities to all of them, and most of them, they have to do with connection, and they have to do with like humility, open-mindedness, and willingness. So, and I think that's like our friend Lewis, that's one of the tenets, 4 of the tenets of his recovery is like, I have to know that I'm humble. I have to be open-minded to, other people's opinions and know that I'm not always right. Those kind of go together. And then willing to change, right? So I really like those principles that they kind of, all of these recovery programs encompass them, at least in my opinion, from my experience. And the ones that, like the 12 steps, for instance, the ones that really stand out is humility for me with the 12 steps. But I think that there are some similarities to all these different pathways to recovery. And I think that's more important to focus on, is like figuring out what works for you, knowing what not to do. And then if whatever path you choose, good luck, and let's do it.
Dude, what did you say? What you had? Humility,
open-mindedness, and willingness.
And willingness to change a little bit. It sounds like that's like a book title for success of anything in life.
Yeah.
Right? It's.
Yeah.
I mean, and that's just it. But imagine this. Families that suffer with substance use disorder. Those aren't the tenants that you'll find in those families,
Sure.
right? Or of the young people or the people that are fighting addiction, right? That's what is missing.
Yeah.
That's what's missing, and that's what. And I couldn't agree more.
No. So
That's a T-shirt, man. We got bumper stickers and T-shirts coming out of this.
the first step was like instrumental in. Well, I guess people do the first step without even knowing they're doing it. Like when you show up to treatment, it's because your life's unmanageable and you're powerless over your addiction. So I always think about that first step is kind of done for us. Like we do that to ourselves, and then we get ourselves into recovery. So like for me, that looked like I couldn't pay my bills. I was getting fired from every job I had. My family was really pissed off at me and didn't want me around anymore. This is a tough question, but how can you, like, what's a family's perspective? Like, what did unmanageability or powerlessness look like as the father?
Yeah. For the first time in my parenting life, it was something that I had no control of. It was something I couldn't fix. And the thing that was talk about the powerlessness about it is I'm doing things the same way that I've always done them. And 2 years ago, everything was fine. And now it's all upside down, right? And because, like we talked earlier, I don't have even a knowledge of how this is happening or how it got here.
Sure.
Boy, talk about, and then you still, through ego or my own hubris, still believing that I can control this. I'm still the master of my domain. And then realizing how powerless I am over that, and talk about being about our lives being unmanageable. Well, we manage it because we hide it, from everyone, and so now we're not getting any assistance or getting any help because, we're just keeping it all in. And
Yeah.
I mean, it's just a train wreck, and that's exactly what it feels like. And then when there's a 5150, or when there's a DUI, or when there's an overdose, or then in my case with my son's death. Everything you believe that you're doing that's even correct, now you challenge that. Talk about feeling powerless. So I think that's how it. I don't know that I had ever thought of it in those terms, but I had absolutely no power. In fact, even now, Nolan, when I go and I speak to groups or people, I don't pretend that I have the answer. Just because I say it doesn't mean it's true. Please believe that. It just means that this is what I've come to accept for today.
Yeah.
After the
lessons learned and experiences.
Yeah. 4.5 years of walking this path and learning more than I ever wanted to know. And I expect there's going to continue to, I'm hoping to continue to grow and to change, and then hopefully pass some of that on.
Sure. Well, I know everyone in Touchstone appreciates you. All the guys at the Sober Living that you've helped, they really appreciate you and your foundation. And thank you very much for being on, Jim. Love you.
It's been just a pleasure, Nolan.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.